Okay, so picture this. You've done it. You've navigated the, let's face it, tricky Taipei rental market, found a place you actually love, signed a 3-year lease, feeling pretty secure, right?
Yeah, finally settled.
Exactly. You're finally making it feel like home. And then, maybe just a few months in, your landlord hits you with, "Hey, look, I need the place back. I'm moving in."
Oof. Yeah, instant stress.
Total panic mode, potentially.
Absolutely. It's one of those situations that can just throw your whole life into, well, potential chaos. And honestly, it's a question we hear about, quite a lot from renters.
Which is exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
We're here to really unpack your rights as a tenant here in Taiwan and, clarify what your landlord's obligations actually are when they want to end that residential lease early, specifically when they say it's for their own personal use.
Right. We've been digging into the legal analyses on this, focusing on this really common scenario.
Yeah, we want to bring you the crucial info.
And our goal today is pretty simple, really. We want to give you a clear picture of the legal landscape. So we'll break down what makes your lease, legally binding in the first place.
Huh?
Then, the very specific, and I mean limited reasons a landlord can legally terminate early. And, importantly, the big one. Why just wanting to move back in, usually that doesn't make the cut.
That's the core of it for many people.
Exactly. Plus, we'll cover the protections you have as a renter and, crucially, what steps you can actually take if you find yourself facing this exact situation. Think of us as your friendly guides through your rental rights.
Okay, perfect. So let's get down to brass tacks then. You signed that lease, that 3-year agreement. What does that piece of paper actually mean legally?
Well, that fixed-term lease, that's the bedrock. It's a binding contract for the entire period, 3 years in your example, for both you and the landlord.
Binding on both sides.
Yes. And legally speaking, neither of you can just unilaterally, tear it up unless there were very specific legal grounds. Or maybe if certain conditions were explicitly written into the lease right from the start and you both agreed.
Okay, so it's about setting expectations. Stability.
Precisely. It's designed to provide stability and security for both parties for that whole agreed time.
Got it. So it's a serious commitment. But look, life happens, right? Curveballs get thrown.
Yeah.
When can a landlord legitimately end a lease early? What are those, must-know legal outs for them?
Right. The law here in Taiwan does outline several very specific scenarios. For example, if a tenant is using the property improperly,
What does that mean, improperly?
like, say, running a noisy business out of a residential apartment, something clearly against the rules or maybe even illegal. And importantly, they don't stop even after the landlord has formally asked them to. That can be grounds.
So it has to be serious. A real breach.
Yes, it's about the tenant seriously breaching the lease terms and, impacting the property or maybe other residents.
Okay, so it's about the tenant not playing by the rules. Makes sense. What else?
Another really critical one is unpaid rent. Now, if a tenant falls behind and they owe an amount that's more than 2 months' rent,
Okay.
and this is key even after the landlord has used the security deposit to cover some of that debt.
So it's the amount after the deposit is applied.
Exactly. What's still outstanding after the deposit, if that remaining amount is more than 2 months' worth of rent, then the landlord might have legal grounds to end the lease. It's clearly laid out in the Land Act and the Civil Code.
Wow, okay. That clarification about after the deposit, that's super
Yeah.
important. I bet a lot of people don't realize that nuance.
It's a common point of confusion.
Yeah.
Other valid reasons. Illegally subletting. So the tenant basically lets someone else take over the lease without the landlord's proper consent, violating the agreement.
Right, like renting it out again behind their back.
Pretty much. Also, if a tenant, say, takes items the landlord left behind, maybe furniture or appliances, specified as the landlord's without permission or against their wishes, that's also a breach.
Okay, so those all seem tied directly to what the tenant does or doesn't do. Are there reasons related more to the property itself?
Yes, there is one significant one. If the landlord has a necessary reason to actually rebuild the property, like major structural work, not just renovations.
Okay, rebuilding.
But even then, there's a rule. They are legally required to give you, the tenant, at least 3 months advance notice, minimum.
3 months notice for rebuilding.
No.
Got it.
And finally, it's always crucial to remember, check your specific lease agreement. It might contain other specific clauses outlining conditions for early termination, but only if both parties clearly agree to them when signing.
Right, right. Always read the fine print, basically. Okay, so let's circle back to the main event here. The scenario that kicked this off. The landlord wants to terminate simply because they want to move back in. Where does that fit in this list of legally acceptable reasons?
Yeah, this is the crux of it, isn't it? And where, understandably, a lot of renters get anxious or confused based on those specific legal grounds we just went through.
The ones you lifted.
Yes, a landlord wanting to end a fixed-term lease early simply because they've decided they want to occupy the property themselves, well, that is generally not considered a valid legal reason for termination.
Really? Even if they genuinely need it?
Generally, no. Not if it's a fixed-term lease and you, the tenant, have been fulfilling all your responsibilities, paying rent, not causing trouble.
So hang on. If I'm paying my rent on time, keeping the place decent, normal wear and tear aside, and not breaking any rules in the lease, their sudden desire to move back in doesn't automatically give them the legal power to make me leave before my 3 years are up.
That's precisely it. As long as you are upholding your end of the bargain, paying rent, utilities, not breaching the terms your right to live there, is generally protected for the entire duration of that agreement.
Wow.
It's a key principle. Allowing landlords to just change their minds like that would completely undermine the security a fixed-term lease is supposed to provide tenants. It protects you from, well, arbitrary displacement.
That is such vital information. I think everyone renting in Taiwan needs to hear that loud and clear. What other kinds of safeguards are built in for tenants here? I know there are some rules about standardized leases.
Absolutely. Taiwan has what's called mandatory and prohibited items in standardized residential lease contracts. These offer some really significant protections.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Okay, well, for instance, landlords are legally prohibited from stopping you from reporting your rental expenses.
Why is that important?
Well, for tax deductions, potentially. Or for accessing subsidies you might be eligible for. It's about financial transparency and allowing you to claim benefits.
Okay, that's a tangible benefit right there. What else can landlords not do under these standard rules?
They also can't stop you from registering your household at the rental address.
Oh, the Huku registration.
Exactly, which you often need for accessing local public services, schools, things like that. It's important for feeling settled. And furthermore, they can't stop tenants from applying for rental subsidies if they meet the criteria.
So they can't block you from getting government help if you qualify.
Correct. And another big one, financially, property taxes. Things like the house tax and the land value tax. Those are the landlord's responsibility, period. They cannot legally pass those costs onto you, the tenant.
Okay, that's huge. So no hidden tax pass-throughs.
Right. These standardized rules really aim to make the rental market fairer and more transparent for everyone.
These all sound like really important protections, things renters should definitely be aware of. Now, we've talked a lot about the landlord side. What about the tenant? What are the main things you need to do to make sure you're holding up your end of the deal?
Well, the tenant's primary job, as we've sort of touched on, is pretty straightforward. Pay the rent and any agreed upon utilities on time, consistently, as laid out in the lease.
Just pay your bills, basically.
Essentially, yes. Meeting those financial obligations consistently is, the cornerstone of being a good tenant. And frankly, it really strengthens your position if you ever do face an unfair termination request, like the landlord wanting to move in. It shows you're fulfilling your side of the contract.
Okay, so let's put it all together. A landlord comes to you, says they want to move back in. You have been that responsible tenant, paying on time, etc. What practical steps should you actually take? What's step one?
Okay, step one, and this is crucial. Clearly communicate your rights back to the landlord. Calmly but firmly.
How do you do that?
You remind them, maybe in writing for a record, that you have a valid fixed-term lease, that it's still in effect for X amount of time, and that you've been fulfilling all your obligations. And then you state, based on the legal framework we've discussed, that their desire to move back in isn't generally a legal justification to end the lease early.
So the initial reaction shouldn't just be panic and start searching for a new apartment.
Not necessarily, no. You actually have the right to, stand your ground and refuse an unlawful demand to leave. You can continue living there according to your lease.
Okay. Refuse the unlawful demand. What else?
Document everything. Absolutely essential. Keep meticulous records, proof of all your rent payments, utility payments, and save copies of all communications with your landlord about this. Texts, emails, letters, everything.
Create a paper trail.
Exactly. That documentation is invaluable if things escalate, if you need to negotiate, or if you need to take further action.
Okay. And what if the landlord doesn't back down? What if they get persistent or start, putting pressure on you?
Right. If the landlord keeps pushing or starts doing things that feel like harassment or attempts to force you out, maybe cutting off utilities, though that's illegal too, then it's definitely time to seek professional help.
Where do you go?
One important route is filing a complaint. You can go to your local city or county government's Land Administration Bureau or their Consumer Protection Office. Remember, these standardized leases fall under consumer protection laws. These agencies can investigate and often help mediate disputes.
Okay, so government channels first, like a consumer protection issue.
It can be, yes. That's a good first line of defense.
What about getting actual legal advice? Lawyers.
Definitely a wise step, especially if the situation is getting tense. Consulting with a legal professional, someone specializing in property law perhaps, is really advisable. They can give you specific advice based on your exact lease and circumstances.
And tell you all your options.
Yes, explain all your legal options for protecting your right to stay. And it's also important to know this. If a landlord does unlawfully force you out,
If they succeed somehow.
right, you may actually have grounds to claim compensation for damages. That could include things like your moving costs, maybe the difference in rent if your new place is more expensive for a comparable standard.
Okay, so there can be financial consequences for the landlord if they act unlawfully.
There can be, and just to be absolutely crystal clear on one point,
Yeah.
can a landlord just show up one day, change the locks, and try to physically remove you or your stuff?
Do they do that?
Absolutely not, no.
Hmm.
A landlord cannot just enter the property you're legally renting or forcibly take it back without your explicit consent or a proper legal court order. Doing that is illegal. Full stop. It could lead to serious legal trouble for them.
Your right to peaceful enjoyment, as they say.
Exactly. That's protected by law.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the main takeaway here. If you've got a valid fixed-term lease in Taiwan and you're doing your part paying rent, not breaking rules, a landlord just deciding they want to move back in is generally not a legally valid reason to kick you out early.
That's the core message. You have rights. You don't have to pack your bags simply because they ask if their reason isn't one of the legally permitted ones.
Know your rights.
Precisely. Being informed about your rights and being prepared to proactively assert them is crucial in this situation. Don't hesitate to communicate clearly, keep those records meticulously, and definitely seek help from the authorities or legal pros if you need it.
This has been incredibly insightful. Really practical stuff for renters. Understanding your lease and these legal protections, it isn't just about avoiding a massive headache and inconvenience.
Yeah, it's more fundamental.
Yeah, it's about safeguarding your fundamental right to, well, stable housing, a secure place to live. So thinking beyond this specific scenario, what other maybe often overlooked aspects of rental agreements here in Taiwan might hold hidden protections or perhaps obligations that renters should really be paying closer attention to?